What is goaltender interference in the National Hockey League?
Everybody's overthinking the system works.
Nolan across, a shot fought off. Anderson, a great save. They score!
But there's clearly contact. There's no doubt in my mind.
We're going to have a challenge.
The decision on the ice stands. We have a good goal.
That tonight is goalie interference any way you look at it. The report that came out from the league is different than what they told me.
I'm just going to start flipping a coin.
No one knows what's going on. Let's get it fixed.
Here comes Dumoulin against Hainsey. Cuts in front. Scores! I don't think they're going to give him the goal.
2 minutes. Goaltender interference.
Wow, there's a turn of about. Dumoulin looked like he made a great play.
I disagree with the call.
I thought if there was any contact, it was after the puck went in.
I do think the call should be challengeable. It looked to me like it was a good goal.
I think there's going to be another pushback, and that comes from Colin Campbell, who's going to give the message across that it's not okay to have the type of criticism we saw. Don't air your public laundry here to the press.
There you have it. PK Subban is set to join us at 6 Eastern. Stay tuned for that conversation. But this is a conversation that the entire NHL is having. You saw Chris Johnston having it there on Hockey Night in Canada. He's kind of a big deal, so it's nice that he joined us here to have it on Tim and Sid. Chris, where are we with this conversation? Does anyone at this point know what goalie interference is?
Well, not definitively. I think is the easy answer. I mean, there's certainly still a lot of confusion out there, and I think that really now this sets up for next week when the general managers get together Monday through Wednesday in Florida to see, where this can be taken. I don't see a simple answer, and I still believe we're going to get into the playoffs and have some form of this debate, be it with a close call in a game that matters, at the highest stakes of the league. So right now, the coaches. There's some confusion. The league has started to put out memos to the teams after every call explaining what the dialogue was between the referees and the video room in Toronto to help foster some understanding to what's going into these calls. But certainly based on what we've heard from coaches around the league, there's still some confusion about what should and shouldn't be considered goaltender interference.
Chris, there's close to 3,500 words dedicated to goaltender interference in the NHL rule book, at least the actual rule itself, Rule 69. Obviously, we're not going to start rewriting the rule, but do you think that there's merit in bringing this to the war room and taking it out of the officials' hands? Because you're getting a different interpretation from each set of officials on what is obviously a rule that's become difficult to understand.
Well, to this stage, Eric, I don't get the sense the league even quite wants that. I mean, some of this is a little bit political behind the scenes. I mean, the referees naturally want to maintain their right to make the call, and the league has been sort of, careful about not wanting to overstep its bounds and to be having a centralized location making calls on the games. But that could be eventually one way that this is ironed out. I mean, I've heard it aired the possibility maybe bringing in retired referees to make that call from a centralized location, be it Toronto, New York, or what have you. But, right from the beginning, that's something the league, I don't believe, really wanted to do. Wanted to get involved with. And really, at the end of the day, there's still going to be discretion in this call, whether it's in that room or among the referees. But obviously, I guess if you have it in the war room, you're limited to one or two individuals, however many guys it takes to work those games.
But Chris, you use the word political. I think of the word or words PR, like public relations. You talked about the fact that the league doesn't want players and coaches talking about officials getting it wrong in their mind, but shouldn't the focus be on the fact that so many people are having an issue with this rule and not how people are reacting to it?
Well, that's fair. I mean, I think where that comes from, DJ, is that, look, the coaches and GMs were the ones who wanted this rule. And the league, I think, had some trepidation from the beginning about opening a can of worms, which, now a few years into it, I believe we can all agree that, in some level, that's what's happened. And, that's where they're saying, work with us. Let's try to get closer together, to get more of an understanding of what should be allowed, but don't just be criticizing all the time. And look, right now it's not a very good PR scene. There's no way around that. I mean, it's only a week ago since Mike Babcock said what he did in Buffalo. Then you have Mike Sullivan on Saturday. I mean, there's more games tonight. It could be someone else keeping this story going, but even between now and next Monday when these meetings start.
And it's funny you say that, Chris, because about a week ago, I was watching that game and watching that all unfold and thinking to myself, geez, the one positive about all this goaltender interference belly aching is the fact that we haven't had a disputed offside review in a long time, and nobody's been talking about that. Sure enough, Sunday night, Evgeny Malkin and the Pittsburgh Penguins, it seems like such a simple fix to this problem. At what point do you believe the GMs are going to force this issue and get this rule rewritten so that the integrity of offsides remains, that so long as you're not breaking the plane before the puck, it's not offside?
Well, that one's sort of fallen below the radar. Maybe the play Sunday you're referencing, Eric, can get it back on there a little bit. But, I do think that there's at least some desire in hockey operations to have that just become a plane. Because it is difficult, even with as good as the cameras are in some cases, to determine whether a skate blade is a fraction of an inch off the ice or not. I think the one concern I've heard raised about that is you might have players sticking their feet out or backwards to try to maintain the plane, and maybe that there's a safety issue there with having more blades up in the air. But that does seem to me like one that could be changed, although I haven't heard as much push for that here in recent weeks.
Yeah, we think of replay helping us get calls right. Is that a specific play in the game where replay doesn't really help because it's not about the spirit or the intent of the play, the way the game has been called historically?
I think so. I mean, I liken it to some of the discussion that's been had in the NFL about what is and isn't a catch. And, I'm a little bit sympathetic to this one as a Dallas Cowboys fan who thought there was a catch a few years ago in the playoffs.
There was a catch.
Exactly. Well, they've since gone back and said, well, that should have been a catch. But years later, that doesn't help me and my sorrow from that afternoon. But, I do think sometimes it doesn't give us exactly what we desire with black and white calls. And look, if you're going to have PK Subban on, maybe ask him about the offside review call in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final that, might still be a touchy subject for him and the Predators, given, the outcome it had on that game and potentially that series. I mean, it's a difficult, line to walk, I think, for the league, and they know come the playoffs, it's just bound to happen, probably repeatedly, these types of situations. So hopefully at the managers' meeting, if nothing else, there can get to a better idea of what the standard is, what those 3,500 words in the rule book mean, Eric, and how they should be interpreted when it comes to these reviews.
It's funny, Chris, a part of that headline segment, Nick Kyprios was talking about Tim Dundon's rush to find a GM. It's interesting, that he wants to make this decision quickly. John Shannon affirmed as much on Twitter today of Sportsnet. And I want to get your take on the candidates. Paul Fenton out of Nashville is one name. Julien Brisebois out of Tampa Bay is another name. My question, and this may be tough for you to answer, is do these guys want to go to a place as their first opportunity as a GM in the league where the owner seems to be as hands-on as Tim Dundon is going to be? Tom Dundon, excuse me.
Well, I mean, certainly you have to feel comfortable in that interview process, I think, before you take the job. And I think it's a especially legitimate question when it comes to Julien Brisebois, who I have the sense is in no rush, to get out of his situation in Tampa with a great team there. And, I think that certainly we can agree he's going to have other opportunities, if it isn't this one, down the line, to decide to where he wants to become a general manager. But there are guys out there that would view this as a positive thing. And look, it sounds, I think, from a distance bad, a hands-on owner, someone who really wants to be involved in decisions. But in the business world, this type of thing is totally normal, and that's the world Tom Dundon comes from. And if you're someone, say, like Lawrence Gilman, who's also involved in this process, and it's been a couple of years since he was let go by the Vancouver Canucks, I'm sure he's aching to get this opportunity. Even Paul Fenton, who, as the longtime assistant GM, the right-hand man to David Poile in Nashville, who might have to be, forced to choose between leaving the Predators at this time, if he were to be offered the job, for example, rather than see out the possibility of a Stanley Cup run. It's a pretty unique opportunity with a team that might be, getting ahead of the curve in some ways. And, certainly traditionally in hockey, it hasn't been done this way. And that will raise some red flags for some people. But at the same time, you might only get one chance to be a general manager, since basically all the guys we know about that have been received permission to talk to this job are in AGM roles, as opposed to, experienced general managers from jobs past. I don't think most of them will be too picky if they get the chance to jump at this.
Thanks, CJ. This has been very productive. You've answered all our questions. You gave us a question for PK, so we appreciate that. We'll let you go so you can water those beautiful plants that you have behind you. Thanks so much, CJ.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.